In the storm-swept town of Merrow Bay, 3 hearts are bound by tides stronger than the sea. When newcomer Felicity Hart arrives seeking quiet research and a fresh start, she finds herself drawn to the rugged and guarded Jackson Hale. Unaware that his heart is already tethered to Nora Bennett, his lifelong friend who's been silently in love with him for years. As secrets surface and emotions rise, a love triangle unfolds beneath gray skies and crashing waves. But when a violent storm threatens everything, only one truth remains. You can love more than once, but only true love can weather the storm. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The first time Felicity Hart laid eyes on Merrow Bay, the sky was painted in streaks of peach and rose, and the sea murmured like it was whispering secrets only she could understand. Her boots crunched softly on the gravel path that wound down from the cliffs, the breeze salty and cool against her face. The town stretched out below like a half-forgotten postcard. Boats bobbing in the harbor, cottages with chipped shutters, gulls wheeling overhead. It was exactly the kind of place she needed. Quiet, unassuming, far from the noise she left behind. She parked her rusted blue Jeep outside a weather-worn house perched near the dunes, her rental for the season, and began unpacking her gear. Notebooks, dive equipment, weatherproof crates labeled with Marine Study Unit, Hart. The ocean was already pulling at her like a familiar tether. But before she could head to the shoreline, a shadow passed the edge of her vision. Bit late in the season to be moving in, a voice called out, low, gravel-edged, and laced with curiosity. Felicity turned. He stood near the gate, hands shoved into his coat pockets. Broad-shouldered and sun-worn, with windswept dark hair and eyes the color of storm-tossed slate. There was a kind of quiet presence about him, the kind that suggested he didn't waste words unless they mattered. I like the off-season, she replied, brushing her hair from her face. Fewer people. More ocean. That earned her a small twitch of a smile barely there. You're the marine biologist Nora mentioned? I am. She held out a hand. Felicity Hart. He hesitated for half a second, then stepped forward to take her hand. His grip was warm and sure, a contrast to the chill of the wind. Jackson Hale. His name fit him, strong, no frills, a little rugged. Well, Jackson Hale, she said, quirking a brow. Unless you're here to help me lug these crates, I should probably get back to work. He gave a soft chuckle, eyes flicking to the stack behind her. They look heavy. Good luck with that. And just like that, he turned and walked away, boots thudding against the dock planks. No lingering, no unnecessary charm. Just a nod and he was gone. Felicity watched him go, a flicker of amusement curling at the corners of her mouth. Merrow Bay might have been a quiet place, but something told her it wouldn't stay that way for long. The bell above the door of Bennett's Cafe gave its usual cheerful jingle as Nora wiped her hands on a faded apron and glanced up from the espresso machine. Outside, the fog was still clinging to the windows like lace, and the morning rush was already fading into quiet. Jackson Hale was late. He usually came in just after the fishermen set out and before the school kids came whining for cocoa and muffins. Today, the clock ticked past 8 with no sign of his familiar gait or his coffee order. Black, no sugar, no nonsense. Then the door opened. Jackson stepped in, the scent of salt and wood smoke trailing behind him, but something was different. His expression distracted, maybe even a little amused. You're late, Nora said, pouring his coffee before he could speak. Met someone, he said, pulling off his coat. Nora blinked. Someone, he shrugged, sliding onto his usual stool at the counter. New in town. Marine biologist. Staying at the old Lark cottage. Oh, right, Nora said lightly, turning to refill the creamer. Felicity Hart. You know her already? She called last week asking about seasonal housing and tide patterns. Seemed sharp. Polite. Nora offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Not many people moved to Merrow Bay in November. Jackson took a long sip of coffee, watching her. She's different. The words hung there like steam above a cup, thin, fragile, and full of meaning Nora didn't want to unpack. She busied herself wiping a spotless counter. I'm glad you're making friends, she said too brightly. Jackson raised an eyebrow. She's not a friend. Just someone passing through. Like most people, Nora thought, though she didn't say it. Instead, she leaned on the counter and studied him. The way his hands wrapped around the ceramic mug, the salt crust still clinging to his cuffs, the little crease between his brows that only deepened when he was thinking too much. She'd known that face since they were 10. She'd memorized it long before she understood why it made her stomach twist the way it did. "So," Jackson said, a teasing glint in his eye, "jealous?" Nora gave a laugh that was all sarcasm and deflection. "Of a woman who talks to seaweed for a living? Please." But when he left, with a muttered thanks and a rare smile, the cafe felt a little colder. And Nora stood behind the counter, hands folded tight, wondering just how different this Felicity really was. And why, for the first time in years, Jackson looked a little less lost. The sea was calm that morning, its glassy surface broken only by the slow rise and fall of the tide, and the sound of Felicity's voice, crisp and clear, calling out data points to no one in particular. She stood ankle-deep in the surf, sleeves rolled up, eyes focused on the reef just beyond the rocks. The air smelled of brine and kelp, and her fingers were already numb from the cold, but she didn't care. The silence, the steadiness of the waves, it was the kind of peace she hadn't felt in months. Then came the crunch of boots on wet sand. She didn't have to look to know who it was. There was a weight to Jackson's presence. The kind of weight that never asked for attention, but always got it. "Didn't think anyone else was up this early," she said without turning. "Didn't think anyone else was in the water this early," he replied, hands tucked in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the reef. "You always work barefoot in November?" Felicity smirked. "Only when I forget my boots." Which, lucky for me, happens often. He watched her for a moment, that unreadable expression on his face. "You always this stubborn?" "Only when I need to be." A pause. Then quietly, "So all this is for a study?" She nodded, her tone shifting to something softer. "It's part of a marine ecology survey. I'm comparing reef patterns across small towns like this, places the world forgets, but where the ocean still remembers." Jackson said nothing, but something in his gaze shifted, like maybe he understood more than she expected. "Ever been diving?" she asked. He shook his head. "Never needed to. The sea and I have our own agreement. I don't go under, and it doesn't take me." Felicity tilted her head. "Sounds like trust." "No," he said. "It's survival." They stood there, silence stretching comfortably between them, broken only by the gulls and the sound of waves curling around their feet. Behind them, at the edge of the path leading up from the bluff, Nora watched. She hadn't meant to spy. She'd come to deliver warm bread from the cafe. Just a small welcome gesture, one she'd told herself wasn't about anything more. But there she stood, half-shadowed by dune grass, fingers tightening around the paper bag. Jackson was smiling, actually smiling, at Felicity. And worse, Felicity was smiling back. Nora turned before they saw her. Her footsteps on the path were silent, but her heart made enough noise for both feet. The wind howled louder that evening, sweeping in from the sea with a bite that rattled shutters and stirred something restless in the bones of Merrow Bay. Jackson found himself standing outside Nora's cafe, his coat pulled tight, boots leaving damp prints across the worn wooden floor as he stepped inside. Nora looked up from where she was stacking cups. The place was nearly empty, the tables cleaned and the windows fogged from the day's warmth clashing with the cold. Only the faint hum of the radio and the clink of ceramic broke the quiet. "You're late," she said, managing a small smile. "I wasn't coming," Jackson admitted, taking a seat at the counter. "But then I started walking and I ended up here." Nora didn't respond right away. She poured him a cup of coffee and set it in front of him, her hands lingering for a second longer than necessary. He didn't thank her. He never did. But she didn't need him to. Instead, he stared into the mug like it might offer answers he couldn't find on his own. Spent most of the day with Felicity. Nora leaned back slightly, her breath catching just enough to betray her. "Oh, she's different," he said again, as if that word could capture the pull he felt toward the woman who looked at the sea like it could speak. "She is," Nora agreed, her voice light but her heart turning heavier with each syllable. "She told me about her ex," he said, tracing a fingertip along the rim of the mug. "Left her after she took a grant job overseas. Said she was too focused on work. Not enough on him." Nora crossed her arms. Sounds familiar. Jackson looked up. What do you mean? She met his eyes, calm, steady, but fierce beneath the surface. You always run from anything that asks too much of you, Jack. From people who want you to see more than the next tide or the next haul. Maybe Felicity scares you because she's not asking you to run. Maybe she makes you want to stay. He blinked, thrown. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. She exhaled sharply, turning her back to him as she reached for another cup to clean. And it's fine. I get it. No, he said. Nora, listen. I came here because I needed to talk. To you. She froze. I'm confused, he admitted, his voice lower now. I feel something when I'm with her. But you've been part of every version of my life. Even the ones I'd rather forget. Nora turned around slowly, her hands trembling just enough to be noticed. Then why haven't you ever looked at me the way you look at her? Jackson didn't have an answer. Silence opened up between them, wide, dangerous, full of truths neither of them were brave enough to name. The cafe suddenly felt too warm, the coffee too bitter. I should close up, Nora said, retreating behind the counter. Jackson stood, hesitating. His hand brushed the edge of the table, then dropped. I'll see you around, he said quietly. And as the door closed behind him, Nora leaned against the counter, blinking fast, trying to stop the tears that came anyway. Outside, the storm clouds rolled in, dark, heavy, and fast. The wind came in like a warning. By sundown, the docks were groaning under the weight of the waves, and the clouds above Merrow Bay had turned the color of bruises. Locals shuttered their windows, tied down their boats, and watched the horizon warily. It wasn't the kind of storm that passed quickly. It was the kind that made people pray. Jackson hadn't meant to go out. He'd heard the call over the radio. A tourist boat stuck just outside the cove, engine failure, drifting fast. No one else was close enough. So he pulled on his rain gear, started the old motor, and didn't think twice. That was Jackson's way. Act first. Think later. By the time the sun vanished completely, so had he. Inside Bennett's cafe, candles flickered on every table, casting golden halos against the gloom. The power had gone out an hour ago, but Nora stayed open anyway, pouring tea for the few locals who needed somewhere to wait, to worry, to not be alone. Felicity arrived with her hood soaked and her eyes wide. He went out, she asked, breathless. Nora nodded, her arms crossed tightly. Didn't tell anyone until he was already gone. Why? Felicity said, voice catching. Why would he do something so reckless? Because that's who he is, Nora said. He can't not save people. Felicity sank into the nearest chair, drenched and silent. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Just the sound of wind against the windows and the eerie creak of the cafe's old bones. Outside, the storm thrashed like a living thing. Inside, two women sat beside each other in the glow of candlelight, both staring at the same empty space across the table. Both in love with a man who might not come back. I never meant to get in the way, Felicity said suddenly, voice barely a whisper. Nora looked at her. I didn't come here looking for this, she continued. Jackson. He made me feel like I could breathe again. Like I wasn't broken. Nora nodded slowly, her eyes soft. He does that. He saves people even when he doesn't know they need saving. I didn't know how you felt, Felicity said. Not at first. Nora smiled bitterly. Most people don't. I've been in love with him for years. I just never said it out loud. They sat in that raw, fragile silence, broken only by a sudden gust that rattled the windows hard enough to make them both jump. Do you hate me? Felicity asked, turning toward her. No, Nora said. I hate that we're both sitting here praying he's alive. I hate that it takes a storm to make the truth come out. A beat. Then Felicity gently. If he comes back, and he chooses you, I'll understand. Nora looked at her, really looked at her. This stranger who had become something more, someone real. Someone brave enough to say what she hadn't. If he comes back, Nora said, her voice trembling, he better have a damn good reason for scaring us like this. And as if on cue, a voice crackled on the emergency radio. Boat's been found, came the Coast Guard's static-drenched words. One survivor. Alive. On shore near the lighthouse. The cafe exploded into motion. People standing, gasping, rushing out, but Nora and Felicity didn't move. They just looked at each other, hearts hammering, hope and fear tangled together. He was alive. But nothing would ever be the same again. By the time they reached the lighthouse bluff, the sky was beginning to break, just barely. The storm had torn itself out over the bay, leaving behind shredded clouds and the sharp, stinging cold of early morning. Salt clung to the air like breath held too long. Jackson lay half covered in seaweed and sand at the edge of the tide, curled like something broken. His boat was nowhere in sight. He didn't open his eyes when the rescue team surrounded him. But he was breathing, and that was enough. Hours later, in a dim room at the Merrow Bay clinic, the machines beeped steadily and Jackson stirred beneath thin hospital sheets. A harsh cut arced across his brow, and his lips were pale, but when his eyes opened, bloodshot and blinking, Nora was there. She stood at his bedside, hair damp, eyes rimmed red. She didn't speak right away. She just reached out and wrapped her hand around his, firm and trembling. He swallowed. "Nora, don't talk," she whispered. "You're okay. That's all that matters." His grip tightened on her hand. "I thought I wasn't going to make it. I kept thinking about the docks. About coffee. About you." A small, disbelieving laugh escaped her. "I'm serious," he said, voice rough. "You were the last thing I saw before I blacked out." Something in her cracked then, not from pain but relief. All the quiet, patient love she'd held for so long swelled up inside her like a wave cresting. She brushed his hair back gently, then whispered, "You scared the hell out of me." His smile was crooked but real. "Guess I finally got your attention." "You've had it," she said softly. "Always." Felicity came that afternoon. The nurse knocked politely before letting her in, and for a moment there was only the sound of wind against the window and the steady beep of the monitor. Jackson looked up, surprised. "Hey," Felicity said. She carried herself with calm grace, though her eyes betrayed the weight of the sleepless night. Jackson smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," she replied. There was a silence, not cold, but full of truths that no longer needed explaining. "I heard you were brave," she said, stepping closer. "Or foolish. Possibly both." He chuckled, winced. "Depends on who you ask." She sat at the edge of the chair beside him. "Nora said you asked for her. That you saw her." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did." Felicity took a deep breath, then reached for his hand. Just briefly, just enough. "You don't have to explain," she said. "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you honesty," he said. "You made me feel something again, Felicity. Something I hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't home. You reminded me who I am, but Nora is where you belong," she finished. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said enough. Felicity stood, her heart heavy and strangely light at the same time. She leaned down and kissed his forehead gently, without regret. "Then hold on to her," she whispered. "She's been holding on to you for a long time." That night, Felicity stood at the cliff's edge, wind whipping her coat as the sea murmured below. She wasn't leaving because she'd lost. She was leaving because she knew what love really looked like now. And it was a woman in a candlelit cafe, waiting in silence, choosing loyalty over longing. And that kind of love deserved to win. 3 days later, the storm was just a memory, washed away like footprints on a tide-worn shore. The skies above Merrow Bay had turned soft with morning light, and the air had that post-rain clarity, like everything had been scrubbed clean. Felicity zipped the last duffel bag closed. The Lark cottage felt emptier than she remembered it, even though most of her things had never really filled it. It had been a pause, a place between wounds and healing. But she wasn't running this time. She was simply ready to move forward, with no resentment, no lingering ache. Outside, Nora waited by the jeep. They hadn't spoken much since the hospital. There were things said in storms and silences that words couldn't improve. But this farewell felt necessary. "Headed back to the city?" Nora asked, hands in the pockets of her denim jacket. "Eventually," Felicity said. "There's a fellowship opening in Oregon I've been putting off. Remote coast. Even fewer people than here." "That sounds about right." Nora nodded, glancing out toward the sea. "You'll be good there." "You'll be better here," Felicity said, smiling faintly. "With him." Nora looked at her, startled by the kindness in the words, by the quiet certainty in Felicity's eyes. "He's lucky," Felicity added. "But he'll never know just how much, unless you tell him." Nora exhaled a small laugh, half nervous, half wistful. We're not good at saying things out loud, Jackson and I. We've always talked around the truth. Then maybe it's time to stop circling it. Felicity stepped forward, pulled her into a hug. It wasn't tearful or long. Just strong. Solid. The way a goodbye between two women who had come to understand each other should be. I'm glad it was you, Nora said softly, voice tight with emotion. If it had to be anyone but me, I'm glad it was you who saw him first. Felicity's smile didn't falter, though her eyes shimmered. And I'm glad it's you who gets to keep him. She climbed into her Jeep and started the engine. Nora watched the taillights disappear down the narrow road, past the dunes, into the open. That evening, Jackson stood by the harbor, hands in his coat, watching the horizon as if it still held answers. He didn't hear Nora until she was standing beside him. She's gone, she said simply. He nodded. I thought she would be. I didn't expect her to leave like that, Nora admitted. With grace. She's stronger than both of us, Jackson murmured. Silence. Then, slowly, she reached for his hand, not with uncertainty this time, but with intention. I don't want to wait anymore, Nora said. We've wasted too many quiet years pretending we didn't feel what we feel. Jackson turned to her, eyes searching hers. I was always afraid if I held on too tight, I'd lose you. And I was always afraid if I let go, you wouldn't come back. He smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I'm here now. And with that, the years between them folded like the pages of an unfinished chapter, and they began again. No more hiding, no more half-steps. Only the full truth, wrapped in salt air and held between two hands that had finally stopped letting go. Winter arrived slowly in Merrow Bay, blanketing the town not with snow, but with a hush, a quieter kind of cold that settled in the bones and made fireplaces and warm bread feel like small miracles. Inside Bennett's cafe, cinnamon hung in the air, laughter crackled over coffee cups, and the bell above the door chimed now and then with the rhythm of a town that, for all its age and wear, still breathed with life. At a table near the window, Jackson sat with a mug in hand, staring out at the sea as if it still spoke to him in ways no one else could. But he wasn't alone anymore. Nora sat across from him, her eyes bright, her cheeks flushed from the wind. A streak of flour dusted her forearm. She looked more like herself than she had in years, like she'd finally stopped waiting and started living. So, she said, sliding him a plate of toast slathered in honey butter. Have you figured it out yet? Jackson raised an eyebrow. Figured what out? Where you're going next? He smiled slowly, the kind of smile that starts deep and takes its time reaching the surface. I'm not. She blinked. You're staying? He nodded, hand closing around hers on the table. I've been chasing the wrong kind of stillness for too long. I thought the ocean had all the answers, but it turns out. He gave her a look so full of warmth it made her chest tighten. Home isn't a place. It's a person. Nora swallowed hard, trying not to smile too big. Failing. Well, she said, teasing now. You did take your time figuring it out. Worth the wait. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sure. More than worth it. Outside, the tide rolled in and rolled out, indifferent and eternal. But inside the cafe, time had stopped for just a moment, long enough for two people to recognize what had been right in front of them all along. True love had waited, and in the end it prevailed.